The Los Angeles Kings have signed a couple of key prospects, plus we're taking a look at a Sportsnet article outlining some offseason potential plans and rumors for teams that are out of the playoffs, such as Detroit, San Jose, Anaheim, and the Los Angeles Kings. We'll jump into all the latest coming up next. So welcome back to another video here at Top Shelf Hockey. As I mentioned today, we have some prospect signings and some offseason rumors to take a look at. Let's kick things off with the Los Angeles Kings signing a couple of key prospects. First up, they signed 2019 second-round pick Arthur Kaliev, who's a U.S.-born player. Played his junior hockey in the OHL for the Hamilton Bulldogs, had a terrific draft year, put up over 50 goals and over 100 points. This past year, his numbers were down a little bit, but he played less games as well. So overall, on a per-game basis, he actually did a little bit better. He played 10 fewer games, but still came close to a 100-point plateau. It was one of the finalists as well for Outstanding Player of the Year. So he had another solid year for the Hamilton Bulldogs. Kaliev is a player who many felt had first-round potential in last year's draft. He's kind of, depending on who you talk to, had different viewpoints on this prospect, but he certainly has a lot of high-end potential. Played for the U.S. at the World Juniors, and is just one of many in this LA Kings deep prospect pool who we're going to be anticipating to see how he does when he joins the pro ranks. The other signing today is 19-year-old prospect Jordan Spence, who was also drafted last year in the 4th round. Now, this prospect has a very interesting background and one that you're not going to hear of very often. He was actually born in Australia. At the age of 5, he moved to Japan with his parents, which is where he first learned to play hockey. Now, he does have dual citizenship between Canada and Japan. He has one parent who's Canadian, one who's Japanese. So while living in Japan, he started to learn to play hockey, like I said, at age 5. When he was 13, his family moved to Canada, where he got involved in the Canadian minor hockey system. Started junior in the Maritime Junior Hockey League, and then moved up to the Quebec Major Junior Hockey League, playing for the Moncton Wildcats, and has really turned out to be quite an offensively gifted defenseman. He's a little bit undersized, about 5'10", 177 pounds. Kind of reminds me a little bit of like a Torrey Krug type of player. I'm not saying for sure he's going to turn out to have the level of success that Krug has or be the exact same kind of player, but it's a player that I've seen play live for the Moncton Wildcats a few times, and he's a player that that's who he reminds me of when I see him play on the ice. He put up 52 points in 60 games last year, had a terrific year. Like I said, another great defensive prospect with a great story behind him to join the LA Kings prospect pool. I mean, when you add these two guys into the mix with some of the other players that they've already signed in the last few months, and this prospect pool of theirs is pretty deep. I mean, they got Alex Turcotte under contract. When you mix in other guys like a healthy Gabe Vilardi, who missed a lot of time, but he appears to be healthy again, was playing near the end of the season. So if he's able to keep going, that's a big plus. Vilardi came in with a very high potential, but then was sidelined with some major back problems. You throw in guys like Rasmus Kupari, Akil Thomas, you have Samuel Fagemo. They acquired Tyler Madden from Vancouver. They get Tobias Bjornfoot, who was also drafted last year. Like, this team is incredibly stacked with lots and lots of talent, and it certainly can't help but wonder how many of these guys might start to see more NHL action when we get into the 2020-2021 NHL season, because obviously they have a lot of veteran guys. They're still on long-term contracts, and I guess we can transition that into our next segment here, where we look at some of these NHL teams that are out of the playoffs and what their offseason plans might be. Like I said, I'm referencing an article here from Sportsnet. We're looking at some moves that they very well could be expected to make. Basically, the article was talking about the main question around each of these teams heading into their offseason, because they're technically officially in theirs now that we know that their season is officially over. And the big question around the LA Kings was, will they move some of their veteran contracts out and make room for some of these younger players, because they have all kinds of prospects that are already starting to get opportunity, and guys that are, like I mentioned here, that are primed and ready. And then they're going to have another high pick in the 2020 draft. Depending on who that player turns out to be, it's debatable whether or not they'd be NHL ready right away or maybe a year away. Considering how high they're picking, the odds are that whoever they select will likely be ready to play in the NHL sooner rather than later. So a couple of the key veterans we're looking at would be Jonathan Quick in goal, Jeff Carter, maybe Dustin Brown. They all have a fair bit of term left on their contract, a fair bit of money, and really out of the three, though, I feel the most likely would be Jonathan Quick to get moved. He doesn't have any trade protection in his contract. He does have a solid resume, even though most recently his play certainly is fair to say has declined in the last few years. There's been a lot of talk about Jonathan Quick's future in LA and whether or not he could be moved. They do have Cal Peterson Anderson as well under contract for the next few years, who could certainly take over. I mean, clearly the LA Kings are going into rebuild mode. Clearly, the LA Kings are rebuilding, and if they're going to run with a younger goaltender, even if while they develop, might not be a terrible idea, and save some money that way. And the other thing too that this article references is that the Kings have so many great prospects. If all of these guys were to develop into NHL players, it's clear that there's no way that they will all play for the Kings organization. So it's quite likely at some point that a few of these guys could possibly be traded once they find who kind of fits in their system and who might be tradable a little bit sooner down the road. Maybe they could package a prospect with one of these veteran guys to help make an incentive for another team to take them on. None of these contracts are going to be easy to move. There is some concern that Jeff Carter could be on LTIR next year as well with injuries, so he might be difficult to trade. And there has been some talk before, which I'm really not sure was entirely truthful, but that if Carter were to be traded, that he might not report and might decide to up and retire. But I can't see Carter leaving money on the table for that, considering he'd have to forfeit the remainder of his contract if that were to happen. So between Carter and Brown, I think those contracts would be tougher to move. Difficult to say what Rob Blake will do, but I will say this: they've done a terrific job with the scouting and drafting. They need to make some room for some of these players to come through, and clearly some of these veterans could be moved out. Like, they're not going to be moving guys like Drew Doughty or Anze Kopitar, but some of these other players need to get more of a role with the team, and obviously some of these vets could be moved this offseason, but it's going to take a sweetener likely to make it happen. So out of these three players for the LA Kings, these veterans, which one do you feel would be the most likely to be moved? And do you feel a prospect would have to be packaged with them to make it worthwhile for another team to take him on? This article also references the San Jose Sharks and the possibility of Doug Wilson pulling off a blockbuster trade or two before they get going for next season. Many people feel that Doug Wilson is going to be looking to make some minor tinkering moves and kind of reset and kind of come back with a lot of the same core players. But really, considering how poorly they did this year, the team wasn't quite the same as before. And you can't help but wonder if Wilson could pull off a blockbuster trade, because he's known for it before. This guy has made several big-time moves during his tenure as GM with the San Jose Sharks, which is quite a long time now. I mean, most recently, he pulled off a big trade for Erik Karlsson. We saw him pull off a big trade for Evander Kane. A lot of the pieces in San Jose were players that were big-time trades made by Doug Wilson. So could he pull it off again and to maybe move out one of his core members to really shake things up and bring back a good return? And of course, if he were to do that, I think one of the more likely scenarios might be Brent Burns. I mean, Burns has 5 years left on his contract. He's 35 years old. He's still quite productive. He certainly would have a lot of appeal to a lot of other teams for sure. I mean, Burns has been with the Sharks for a long time. It's hard to imagine him playing anywhere else at this point. But at the same time, if you look at the other options between Erik Karlsson, Marc-Andre Vlasic, they're both younger than Burns. And clearly, I think, with the term left and the age, it would make more sense if they're going to go down that road to possibly consider a Burns trade. Up front, I don't see them moving. Their captain, Logan Couture. There is some debate whether or not guys like Thornton and Marleau return. I know many people feel like it's pretty much a given that they'll sign another one-year deal and make the comeback with the Sharks next season. But will Doug Wilson want to do that, or will he want to open up opportunities here for other guys on the team? We've heard rumblings in the past few weeks about guys like even Thomas Hertl or Kevin LeBanc as well. So there's clearly all kinds of chatter around this team. When you have an aggressive GM like Doug Wilson, who's known for making some pretty big-time blockbuster trades, there's certainly no question why there's so much talk surrounding this team right now. But personally, if they're going to pull off a blockbuster trade, my opinion is that they would try to move Brent Burns, say what kind of return they could get. Obviously, there's a lot of term and a lot of money still left on his contract, which would certainly make things tricky. Based on rumors that we heard earlier a few months back, it certainly seems like the most likely one, but by no means a given, and by no means would be an easy deal to do. But it will be interesting to see how Doug Wilson shakes up this Sharks lineup before next year starts. Now, staying in California now, let's take a look at the other California team, the Anaheim Ducks. And there's some very interesting comments from GM Bob Murray in a recent interview here today that we've seen. Commented a lot on the job of first-year coach Dallas Eakins. I'll put up a little snippet here from Twitter showing some of his comments as we talk through this. But essentially, Bob Murray said that he tried to stay out of the dressing room and kind of leave it more to the coach, but he felt that was a big mistake, that he should have been a little bit more hands-on. Of course, before he hired Eakins the year before going into the end of the NHL NHL season, we saw Bob Murray go behind a bench and take over the coaching duties for the last stretch of the season, indicating that he wanted to kind of get into trenches more, interact more with the players on a different level, and kind of see what was going on and figure out who fit longer term to be part of the solution and who should be moved out and what kind of trades they should make. And obviously, he still feels he should have been in there a little bit more. He said that Dallas Eakins essentially still had some bad habits of dealing with younger players from his time in Edmonton. But at the same time, he changed some of those ways and behaviors throughout the season. It was a bit of a learning curve, and he felt that overall he did a pretty decent job. But, at the same time, certainly said that a lot of young players were getting away with a lot, and he wasn't pleased with it, and there's going to be changes. One player that was asked about as well was Rickard Rakell, who ultimately has been on the decline for the past couple years. We saw Rickard Rakell really take on a more prominent role, had back-to-back 30-goal seasons, and then the last 2 seasons he hasn't even hit 20. Production has been down. He did say that Rakell was going to be working hard and getting ready for next year, and he seems to be determined to bounce back. But, of course, those are good things to hear, but at the same time, you can't help but wonder if he might have been trying to pump up his value a little bit, and maybe he would consider moving him, even though at one point many felt Rakell would be one of the big parts of the team's future. He's at a stage in his career now where he could still have some trade value, even though his production's been down. He's still in his late 20s, still has a lot of time left on his contract, which certainly could be appealing to a lot of other teams if he can, especially can take on maybe not such a substantial role, be a good secondary scoring player for some other teams. But at the same time, you have to kind of wonder with the Ducks, and the big question in this article is who's going to score the goals for Anaheim next year. They struggled a lot with that this past year, and obviously if they move out a former 30-goal scorer like Rakell, it very well could continue to get worse depending on how things go and who they get for return on this player. But they do have a lot of young players with potential that are really going to help this team a lot. But at the same time, how quickly are they going to be up to speed to doing that? They're going to need some more time and experience, you would think, at least before they can have a more of an impact at the NHL level. I know I've talked a lot about before how the Ducks might be looking to move a defenseman, at least one of their more established veteran guys, like perhaps a Josh Manson. And I'm going to reiterate that point again because we have so many one-way deals that we've seen with the Ducks. I mean, they had another one yesterday that was announced. They've had 4 defensemen who are not really all that established at the NHL level sign one-way deals in the last number of weeks here. When you mix them in with their other veteran guys, it can't help but wonder, like I said, if a veteran guy might get moved out. If you're going through a rebuild, you do need some veterans, but you want to give as much youth opportunity as possible. And based on contracts within their more experienced guys, and to me, it would make more sense to move Manson and keep Fowler and Lindholm as your top guys to kind of lead the rest of the blue line group. But, that's just my opinion. But either way, with everything that's gone on in Anaheim and the comments from Bob Murray today, I do expect them to be busy. I do expect to see a lot of activity, and I would not be shocked to see guys like Manson and Rakell find themselves wearing a new jersey next season. Lastly, here we want to take a look at the Detroit Red Wings and some of the options here that Steve Yzerman has on the table. Yzerman himself has said that this team needs to get better in all areas. They need to get better in goal, they need to defend better, and they need to have better forwards and score more. So clearly, it's a work in progress here, but according to the Sportsnet article, there's certainly some players that are not expected back, and that includes RFA forwards Brendan Perlini and Adam Ernie. Both guys were acquired by Yzerman. They're both pending restricted free agents, and according to this article, they don't expect Yzerman to tender qualifying offers to either one. Of course, he might try to trade either of them before that gets to that point so they can maybe get some kind of a return on these assets, but clearly that might not even happen because they didn't really have a great season at all. They really might not have any kind of a market for another team to pick them up. So if they go the route of not qualifying them, they will become unrestricted free agents, and then they'll be free to sign with any other club. Of course, from the UFA side of things, they're not expected to bring back goalie Jimmy Howard or defenseman Jonathan Erickson, so there's a couple more veterans who will be off the team moving forward. Of course, we've also heard comments from Yzerman regarding locking up key guys like Anthony Mantha and Tyler Bertuzzi to longer-term contracts and being a big part of the team solution. We've talked about the fact that the Red Wings likely are expected to name a team captain for next year, which is expected to be Dylan Larkin. Of course, he's under contract longer term as well. And of course, one of the big factors for Detroit is whether or not they get that first overall pick. The draft lottery coming up June 26th is going to be an important day in their franchise moving forward here. Do they get to pick first overall, second, third? No matter where they pick, they're going to get a great player. Obviously, picking first overall would just mean that much more to the franchise than getting their hands on top prospect Alexis Lafreniere, who at least at this point in all of these young prospects' career expected to be more of the franchise player. But it's hard to say sometimes how things work out. Maybe a player ranked second, third, or fourth could be just as valuable longer term, depending on how everything works out. Unfortunately, we don't have a crystal ball to predict that, but right now Lafreniere looks to be the most impact player amongst all these prospects, and of course Detroit would love to have him in their organization. It does look as though they'll re-sign guys like Robbie Fabry and Alex Biega. Many believe they've played well enough to earn themselves a new contract to stay in Detroit, and that the most likely scenario that we're going to see with the Red Wings would be for them to make other acquisitions of similar types of players. Obviously, we saw, like I mentioned, with Perlini and Ernie, those guys didn't really work out. Yzerman's made several moves where he's acquired young prospect type players that are not quite established enough, looking for more of an opportunity where they weren't working out. As I mentioned in a prior video, maybe they would look to a guy like a Jesse Puljujarvi in Edmonton, and clearly we have the Steve Yzerman, Ken Holland connection, so the two guys that know each other very well, and clearly Puljujarvi wants out of Edmonton, sat out the entire season, and maybe he'd be the exact type of player that Yzerman would be looking to give an opportunity to in Detroit. I think it would make a lot of sense. Clearly it's a low risk, high reward type of transaction. You can hit a home run with some of these players. We've seen prospects change teams and really take off, and unfortunately other times it hasn't worked out. But if you don't give up too much, it's worth the risk, and if it pays off, then you look that much more wise down the road. But Puljujarvi, to me, could be a prime target for Yzerman once we hit the trade season near the NHL draft. I could see him offering Ken Holland a pick or two to bring him over, but that's just my opinion. Detroit will be busy, and there's certainly going to be a lot of things going on. I expect Yzerman to be incredibly active. And the Red Wings are certainly expected to have more of an injection of youth between adding guys that are already with their prospect pool, bringing in other prospects from other teams, like I mentioned, and of course what they get in the 2020 NHL Draft. They're going to have to dip into free agency a little bit. Primarily, one of the big things, they have to get themselves a goaltender. I've mentioned before, I think a guy like a Robin Leonard, for example, who wants that longer-term contract and could be a big piece to build around. A lot of these younger players might be a great option, but I guess we'll see what Yzerman will do. Yzerman's got lots of options, lots of flexibility, and it's going to be a very important summer for the organization. Of course, as always, let me know your thoughts on everything discussed today down in the comments, and we'll continue the conversation. If you're new to the channel, consider subscribing and turning on your notifications so you don't miss any future content, and give this video a thumbs up if you enjoyed it. I'd appreciate it if you did. As always, thank you for watching, and I will catch you next time.